And welcome back to RealAg Radio here for the Farmer Rapid Fire on Rural Radio 147 Sirius XM. Of course, the Farmer Rapid Fire is brought to you by Corteva. And speaking of Corteva, we've got Allison Rasmussen, agronomy lead for crop protection with Corteva in Western Canada. And she's based out of Manitou, Manitoba. Allison, how are we doing?
I'm doing great, Shaun. How are you doing today?
Good. Well, it's hard to believe it's already Ag Days this week. Time is flying by. Um, weed control, definitely a discussion when you are at Ag Days in the Corteva booth. I'm sure is going to be a hot topic for a lot of growers. So we got a lot of challenges out there. As one weed scientist described to me, the weeds are winning. And one, I guess we focus a lot on like kochia. We focus on like water hemp. Like there's some weeds that seem to take up all the oxygen in the room. And one that probably doesn't get enough attention and its challenges is wild oats. And we're really up against it on wild oats when it comes to management of them, aren't we?
Yeah, we definitely are. And I would agree. We're focused heavily on some of our broadleaf weeds. The wild oat has been called the billion-dollar weed. It is one that we struggle with across all of Western Canada, across all three provinces, all from north to south. And when we really look at it, wild oats really are one of our most competitive and costly weeds in our annual crops. So not just in our cereal crops, but in our broadleaf crops as well. And the game's changed. We're not just fighting the weed anymore. We're really fighting the biology of the resistance, and we don't necessarily have the tools to count on that we used to count on.
Okay, so what do we do? What are the and everybody's gonna have a bit of a different strategy based on their farm, but like what are the considerations in our strategy? Like because we're new products to control here are not dropping out of the sky. So we got to maybe get a little bit creative here. So what are some of the things we got to consider?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And really, when we talk about resistance, it's really kind of important to understand how did we get where we are, right? So why are we here? Why are we fighting that? And then more importantly, what do we do to manage? So what do we have to pivot? Where do we pivot to manage and have some strategies to keep our fields cleaner? And so really, when we think about it, for decades, we've relied on heavily on group ones. The fobs, the dims. A decade or so ago, we got the dens. And then after using them for a long period of time, we introduced group twos. So when we're looking at weed surveys, they're talking 70% of the fields having resistance in the prairies. So, it's a problem, right? It's something we need to deal with. And we're using these group ones and these group twos historically in all of our crops. So our broadleaf crops as well as our cereal crops. So we're not really looking to rotate out of them, right? So we've got to think about how do we beat them. And when we're looking at how do we beat them, we really should understand too that they are masters of survival. So if we look at a single plant, it's going to drop hundreds of seeds. So under high competition, maybe 50 seeds. Under no competition or little competition, 400 or 500 seeds a plant. So we've got a lot being put back into that seed bank. And then the kicker is they have a staggered dormancy on top of it. So it's not just a 1 year problem. What doesn't germinate next spring is going to look to germinate in the next 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 years. So when we put that population in the ground, it's coming back at us. So that's seed bank, right? It's really about resistance management as a whole is about trying to prevent seeds from going back into the seed bank. That's ultimately how we beat it, right? So lots of ways that we can do it. Integrated weed management, some of the strategies I talk to customers about when we're looking over their resistance tests from the year previous or we're trying to figure out a strategy is herbicide layering. So we've really been counting heavily on that one application, that one and done. I'm going to spray it at my 3 to 4 leaf stage of my wheat, or I'm going to go in with my canola and I'm going to add a group one to help improve that wild oat control. But I just kind of want to spray once. And so when we look at herbicide layering, we really need to start thinking about, can we do a soil applied? Can we do a pre-emergent? Can we go back to some of those 3s, 8s, 15s, right? That we used to use that are going to reduce our population, allow our crop to come up under less competition, and then have a smaller population to control, or a significantly smaller population to control. So that's one method. Still relying on herbicides. So, that's still kind of a one strategy. If we can lay that on top of crop competition. So as we're going into the spring and we're thinking about seeding, increasing seeding rates in your cereals, as an example, is probably one of the most cost-effective ways to manage wild oats. There is studies that show that by increasing your seeding rate, you can reduce the wild oat biomass by 50%. So narrowing the rows. So the wider the rows, the more sunlight, the more space, the more opportunity those wild oats have to thrive and survive. So if we can narrow those up, increase that crop competition, wild oats don't like to really compete for light or nutrients. So if we can shade them, that helps. And kind of our third pillar that we can look at for the 2026 season is rotation. So if we're stuck in a tight canola wheat rotation, which is probably fairly prevalent across Western Canada, we're really kind of playing right into the wild oats hands. Like we're creating that perfect environment for them to thrive. So putting in something like a winter cereal, too late for this year, but something we can look at for next year, a fall rye or a winter wheat. If that crop gets a head start, again, it's just early competition. If you have a really big problem field, you can look at like silage or perennial forages, kind of as your best option. You keep cutting those before the wild oat set seed. Again, it's reducing that seed bank. So it almost can act like it's hitting a reset button. We can keep that silage or forage in for a number of years. So those are some of the options that we have outside of chemistries.
Yeah. And no easy solutions or like some sort of silver bullet and like just do this and all your problems are solved. It really does require, maybe, multiple of those options. Try to put it all together. Allison, thanks so much for joining us here today on RealAg Radio. Have a great time at Ag Days this week, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Oh, thank you so much, Shaun. Do take care.